Level 6 of our character model, and we're going to continue from where we stopped on our last tutorial. So what we'll do now, we'll do 3 for face selection and select this face, hold shift, select this face and this face. So what we'll do now, we'll do E to extrude and right click to release, and I'll select this face first and say S to scale inwards a little bit like this. Select this face and say S to scale inwards. Select this face and say S to scale inwards. Select this face and say S to scale inward. So I'm going to hold shift and select this face and move downwards on the Z axis like this. So what we'll do now is to say E to extrude, E to extrude, E to extrude upwards to this point. It is okay now. I will say Ctrl arrow to add one loop cut here. Ctrl arrow to add one loop cut. Ctrl arrow to add one loop cut, and Ctrl arrow to add one loop cut. So I'll say 3 for face selection again. I'll select this face and say E to extrude. I'll right click to release, and I'll say S to scale inwards a little bit, and I'll say E to extrude upwards again. And I'll say Ctrl arrow to add just one loop cut here. This is okay now. So I'll say slash on my keyboard to unhide every other object. So if you watch now, if I hold Alt and select this edge here, we have in our statistics, we have 18 vertices here. And we want it to be 16 vertices with our hand because we have, if I select this and say tab, we have in here, we have 16 vertices here. So our hand is supposed to be 16 vertices also. So I'll say slash to hide every other thing. So I'm going to merge 2 vertices to make these 16 vectors all together. So what I'll do next, I'll select this and hold shift and select this, and I'll say M on my keyboard, and I'll say word at center, and I'll select this also and say M and say word at center. So if I hold Alt now and select this, now I have 16 vertices here. So what I will do now, I'll say Ctrl arrow to add a loop cut here so I can have this face correctly. So this is okay now. So I will say slash to unhide every other thing. I'll come to my front view. I'll say 3 for face selection, A to select all, and I'll say G to grab. But if you watch now, my hand is very big, so I will say S to scale and ensure it's the size of the hand, and I'll say arrow to rotate it to this point. I think this is okay now for my character hand. You can say arrow twice to rotate this. But let's leave it this way. I say S to scale. So what next we'll do now is to add, let's scale a little bit, S to scale a little bit, is to merge our character hand to our body. So we can rotate it to that point. So I'll say tab for object mode. So I'll select this and hold shift and select my character body and say Ctrl J on my keyboard. So if I do Ctrl J now, so now I've joined this to this, and now this is now looking, so now we have a duplicate of our character hand out there. So what I'll do next is to say select this now, and I'm going to turn off my shade smooth. Right click and say I'll turn this off. So now in my right view, I'll select this hand. You can say tab for object mode. I'm going to move this to this point. But first, let me come here and select. I can say B to select. Say Alt Z. Say B to select. So what I'll do now, come here to my right view. move this to this point. You see arrow to rotate a little bit. It's now looking like this. So now I'll say 1 for vector selection. So now I can now wet these vertices to these vectors here. So I can start from here and say select these two and say M and say where that center. Select this to this and say M where that center. Select this with this and say M where that center. Select this, hold shift, select this and say M where at center. Do that for this also. Select this and say M where at center. So do that for the rest of it. M and word at center. Hold shift to select multiple vertices. Hold shift, select M word at center. M word at center. Say M to word at center. And say G twice to move this to this point. Say M word at center. And say word at last. No, let's see word at center. So if you watch now, we have one vertex left here, which we can play around with. So I can say 2 for edge selection. I can select this and say delete and say dissolve edge. I say 1 for vector selection. Select these 2 and say M to where that center. Say G twice to move this. So now I can see how I can solve these issues now. So what I'll do now, I'll say K to cut. I can cut to this point. Say enter. I can also add one loop cut there. I can bring this to this point and say enter. What I want to do, okay, let me say two for edge selection. Delete this edge, dissolve that edge. You can say 1 for vector selection. I'll say K again and cut this at this point. I'll say 2 again, select this edge and say dissolve. 1 for vector selection, K to cut. So let's cut from this down here to this point and say enter and say K. Cut this to this point. And now I can now cut this and say K to cut. We have one here, so now let's do Ctrl Z back. We messed up one, so let's do Ctrl Z back. Okay, this is where we have our mistake. Ctrl Z back. We didn't join this. Say M and say at center. Okay, this is where the mistake came from. To ensure that the vertices are following each other, so we don't have any loopholes. M to word at center. Select these 2 and say M to word at center. Say M to word at center. Say M to word at center. Okay, this is the right one now. M to word at center. Okay, this is okay now. So we can now shape our character hand. I say G twice to move these vertices and ensure it's straight. G twice to move these vertices around. So what we'll do now, we can turn on our subdivision surface. We have our character hand like this. So now we'll select this and say right click and say shade smooth. So we are done with our character modeling now. So now we can now create our character shirt and short. So it's very simple. Before we do that, let's turn this off. Right click and say flat. Say Alt Z. Say tab for edit mode. Let's come here where we have overlays and turn on our wireframe so we can see properly. So say tab and we say 3 for face selection. And we can select from this region here to this point. For our character shot, you can say Shift D to duplicate, right click to release, and say P on our keyboard to separate. So click on selection. Now we've separated that, and click on plane 02 and say F2 to rename, and we can call this shot. So we have this our shot here. We say tab for edit mode, 1 for vector selection. So we can say S to scale this shot following our character reference. We can even hide our character body so we can work on this shot properly. And say S to scale. And say Alt Z. Move it to this point. Just try to play around your character shot and just make some few adjustments in here. Say Alt Z. And let's see how it looks like. Now we can turn this on now and see this for our character shot. So we can also make some few adjustments in here. So we can turn on proportional editing by saying O on our keyboard, and we can move this to this point. We can increase by scrolling our mouse. And let's just try to move these vectors backwards. We'll select this also and move them forward a little bit. So move them forward. This will be our character shot. So select this one downwards here, and let's try to move it this way and push this outwards a little bit. Let's leave this way. So what we'll do now, we'll come to here, we'll have our modifiers property, come to add modifier. I'm going to add what we call solidify modifier to it. So now we can increase the thickness here. minus 0.023. That is okay. So now you just give it a little bit thickness. So but before you add this modifier, let's delete it first. Let's come to our mirror modifier and say apply in our object mode. So now we can now add our solidify modifier to it, and let's make it minus 0.23, minus 0.23. Guess that's okay. Let's make it minus 0.25. So now what we'll do now, we'll come here and say apply, and we'll say tab for edit mode. You can say O for proportional editing, and let's move this towards our character body. Not too much, just a little bit close to our character body. So what we'll do next, we'll come here, the back. I think the back is okay. So now we'll add one loop cut here, Control arrow to add one loop cut here. And rotate and add one loop cut here also, Control arrow to add one loop cut here, and Control arrow to add one loop cut here. Now we're done with the shot now. We can now create the shirt, our character. So select this and say tab for object mode, say Alt Z, 3 for face selection, and we'll select all these. We say B on our keyboard for box selection, say B again for box selection, select this region, B for box selection, B again for box selection. This is enough, say B for box selection. We'll say Alt Z, if we selected that. So now you can examine your character. So select and select around your character neck for the t-shirt. Come to your front view and select to this region. Let's leave it this way first. So now we'll do Shift D to duplicate. Right click to release and say P on your keyboard to separate, and click on selection. So now if I say slash, right now I can now hide this plane. So now this is my character shirt. So I'll come to my right view and say Alt Z, say 1 for vector, say tab on my keyboard and 1 for vector selection. So I can select all these and say S to scale. Well, if you watch, I can select all these downwards first and say delete all those vertices. So I can now say 2 for edge selection, select that edge loop and say S to scale this a little bit, and let's say E to extrude, and let's say S to scale. You can come to our front view and move this to this point. Let's bring it downwards. Hold Alt, select this also. So we want our shirt to cover our shots like this. So now I can say slash, I can turn on my character body so I can see how it looks like. Okay, so what I will do next now is to work on the neck of my shirt. not looking nice. So I can select this and select this loop and say, can delete this and say delete on my keyboard. The one for vector selection. But let me do Ctrl Z first. So what I'll do now, I'll say one for vector selection and say G twice to move this loop, but it's not going to be nice. So I don't want these vertices. So I'll delete these vertices so that I will be left with only just these vertices. So I'm going to select all these vectors and say G twice to move them, or I move them myself to this point. And now I can turn this off, left with this. So you can decide on your design for your character shed. G twice to move this point. Move this to this point. I'm going to move this to this point. And move this to this point. Move that to that point. So I'll just move this to this point, following my character reference. So I'll say G twice to move this loop. And G twice to move all this loop also. Okay, now I'm done with this. What I'll do next is very simple. I'm going to add what we call solidify modifier, but before I add solidify modifier, I'll turn this on and see how my character shed looks like. I'll say one for vector selection, tab, one for vector selection. I say O for proportional editing. You can select this and move this backwards a little bit. Okay, move this upwards. Just a little bit upwards. We'll move this forwards. Move this forward also. If we've done this now, we are getting there now, and what we'll do next is to say tab for object mode, come to our mirror modifier and apply that. So we'll come to our add modifier and apply what we call solidify modifier again, and this time I'm going to make the thickness 'okay. Let's see if this is okay. This is okay for minus 0.13, 0.13, but we can make it 0.17 is okay. 0.17 is okay. So we'll say tab for object mode. You can say slash to hide. And we say Ctrl arrow to add one loop cut here. But we can't add loop cut until we apply this. We say tab for object mode. We'll come here and say apply. And we say tab again for object mode. Now we can add a loop cut here. Ctrl arrow to add loop cut here. And we say Ctrl arrow to add one loop cut here. And we say Ctrl arrow to add one loop cut here. I see Control arrow to add one loop cut here. Control arrow to add one loop cut here. You can say 3 for face selection. Hold Alt, select this face and say E to extrude. Right click to release. And let's say S to scale this outward like this. So if I turn this on, I have something looking like this. If I turn this off, so now I'll come here again and hold Alt, select this and say E to extrude. Right click to release and S to scale. So you can add one loop cut here again. Now if I turn this on, I have something looking like this, which is nice. So I'll add one loop cut here also. Control arrow to add one loop cut here. We'll do that here also. Control arrow, add one loop cut here. Say 3 for face selection. Select this face and say E to extrude. Right click to release and say S scale. Control arrow, add one loop cut here. Control arrow to add another loop cut here also. So we'll do this for the neck also. Control arrow to add one loop cut here. So we'll say 3 for face selection. Hold Alt, select this face, E to extrude, right click to release and say S to scale. And what we'll do next is to add one loop cut here. And that is okay now. So we'll turn on our subdivision surface. So we can come to overlay and turn off our wireframe. So this is our character shirt. We say slash to hide every other object. We do that for the shot also. We say tab for object mode, for edit mode, and say Control arrow to add one loop cut here. 3 for fake selection. Select this face, say E to extrude, right click to release, and say S to scale, just a little bit, and say Control arrow to add one loop cut. Do the same here. Control arrow to add a loop cut. 3 for face selection. E to extrude, right click to release and S to scale, and Control arrow to add one loop cut here. And that is okay now. And now we can turn on our subdivision surface. Right click and say shade smooth, select the clothes, right click and say shade smooth. So select our character body and let's apply our subdivision surface. Right click and say shade smooth. So now we have our character fully created with clothes on. So this is a simple way of creating character clothes. Very easy. And so what we'll do next now is to add shadings to our character. So to add shadings, that will be in the next level, in level 7. So thanks for watching. Please kindly subscribe, like, and follow me on YouTube, follow me on Twitter and on Facebook. And the model for this character will be in on my SELAR account. So I'll be dropping the link once we are done with this character. So you can purchase the character on my selar.co account. So you can check my description and you will see the link there to my SELAR account. Thanks.